I'd like to call this meeting to order of the General Government Committee meeting. Tonight, we're going to be hearing about employee handbook, but first, I believe we need a roll call.
Councilmember Dennehy, absent. Councilmember Gonzalez, absent. Councilmember Jaquez,
Present.
Councilmember Meisner, absent. Councilmember Reed, absent. Councilmember B. Smith,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick,
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
Thank you, Cindy. And we will have other council members joining us as we proceed here. As a matter of fact, here comes Mr. Denny. So, Ryan, would you like to lead off, or Ivy, or how are we going to do this?
No, I'm happy to start. And Mayor, members of council, this is an update to our employee handbook. The current employee handbook was developed in 2008, so it's long overdue for an update. And, want to thank Ivy and Catherine Sellers, the city attorney, for all the work that they put into this. This has been a long process, and they've had to do several revisions throughout the process because of changes in legislation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy Morris, our Human Resources Director.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'll go quickly over the agenda. We will start with an HR update. We're going to talk about the purpose of an employee handbook, the importance of regularly updating the employee handbook. We'll talk a little bit about the 2008 handbook, the methodology that I use for updating the handbook, and then we'll talk about the 2021 handbook.
Okay, and make sure the microphone is kind of pointed at your mouth there.
Yeah, Cindy tells me.
Thank you.
So we'll start with an HR update. We'll talk about get to the right slide. The 2020 projects that I've been working on over the last year. So the big one was the Paylocity implementation. The implementation was a really large project with a big time commitment. It often resulted in 50-hour work weeks just because it was such a huge commitment to implement the new program. It wasn't just plug and play. There was a lot of work on the back end to get everything set up. So some of the module implementations were faster than others. Some took just, maybe half a day to a day. Others took weeks and sometimes months. So to start with, there was anywhere from 2 to 8 hours of training per module before we even started working with the implementation specialist. So a lot of training on the back end to learn the system and get familiar with it before we actually started making changes and getting it ready for implementation. So some implementations involved revamping existing processes and procedures. So for that, because this was such a big system that was going to be used citywide, I wanted to make sure and involve department heads to get their input rather than just relying on me and my experience and how I thought things might work best with the city. So did a lot of meeting with the department heads and with Ryan to make sure that the processes that we were putting in place through the modules were going to be something that were useful for everyone. So the biggest time commitment was with the benefits module, and that involved working with Paylocity, benefit health advisors, and all of our vendors. There were multiple audits to verify the data that was being transferred in was accurate. We created some ghost employee profiles so that we could act as the employee to go through the benefit enrollment and whatnot to make sure everything was working smoothly. The post-launch modification improvements are continual and ongoing, even though all of the modules have been launched. The more we use them, the more we learn about features that Paylocity can do, so we kind of modify our approaches to utilize and enhance each of the benefit modules. So it's an ongoing updating process. So with the recruitment, that's probably one of my favorite modules, the recruitment and the onboarding. The recruitment is all online, so I'm able to post positions. Those positions then automatically go out to Indeed, which has really broadened our reach for candidates. So the number of candidates that we're getting in for our positions, our candidate pool has really grown, which has been a really great feature and a nice problem for the supervisors to have. We've had a couple of the positions that have had 80 applicants, which the supervisors are just blown away by the reach that we have, and it really helps us get the most qualified candidate in for the position, so it's been a great tool. Another one that I really like is the onboarding. So in the past, new employees would come in and they would spend an hour filling out new hire paperwork, writing their name, address, birthday, social security over and over and over on those enrollment forms. And now it's just, they do it all online. They fill out their basic information once and it just carries through. So it's a huge time saver for our new hires. That way they can get out of HR doing new hire paperwork and into the field starting their training. So it's been a great, great project and it's really helped streamline processes. So with the Paylocity, one of the modules is their learning module. So with that one, it's a platform to push out much needed training that hadn't been conducted in several years. So once we got that implemented, I was able to push out the sexual harassment training. We did diversity inclusion, workplace violence, all of our annual required CIRSA training. So it makes it a lot easier to administer, a lot easier for employees to just take that training at their computer versus taking time out of their day to come to City Hall, attend in-person training. So it's been a really useful module as well. And then something else that I've been working on is relationship building. So just coming into the city new and getting to know the employees, getting to know their supervisors, building that trust and the comfort level so that they're comfortable coming to me. So far it's working. I get visits daily from employees, which is great. So you're just letting everybody know that I'm a resource, I'm an advocate, and I'm there to help them. So, all right. And before I go on, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to the city, to Ryan for trusting me as the HR director and giving me the opportunity to come in and work with such a great group of people. It's been awesome. The employees are great, the supervisors are great. It's been a really great experience all around, and so I'm just very appreciative and thankful of that. So let's dive into the purpose of an employee handbook. So when an employee starts a new job, they need a well-written, easy-to-use resource that allows them to familiarize themselves with the guidelines, the expectations, the culture. So that resource is the employee handbook. The handbook helps reassure employees that the policies are being applied consistently and fairly, and not just because the supervisor said so. So it's a tool that not only the employee can go back and reference, but the supervisor, the city administrator, HR, we can all use it as a tool to make sure we're all being consistent. So the importance of updates. So when I came on as HR director, one of my biggest challenges was the handbook because it was outdated, it's very long. When an employee or supervisor would come to me, I would look at the handbook. I would have to go out and research any resolutions that may have been entered. Then I had to go out and do research to see whether or not there were any updated laws, and it was just a very frustrating, time-consuming process when all I really wanted to be able to do was to help that employee or that supervisor, and so it was frustrating for me. So me having the familiarity with handbooks over my many years in HR, I could only imagine what it was like for an employee who was trying to find something in the handbook. Here I was, I'm familiar with looking for things in handbooks. They aren't. So if I was frustrated, I knew they must be frustrated. So ideally, the handbook should be updated every 2 to 3 years, sometimes more depending on the number of changes in laws and regulations. So outdated handbooks are also not useful to anyone. They're not useful to the employee, they're not useful to the supervisor, they're not useful to HR, so it's important to keep that handbook updated regularly. Handbooks that are out of date can also create a legal liability for the city. If I am trying to follow a policy that's in our handbook and it's not the most current law, and that's how I'm administering that, it can come back and haunt us later because it's not the current law or regulation.
Quick question, Ivy. How old is our current handbook? Oh,
2008 was the last time that it was updated. Yeah. So obviously, it's outdated. It's lengthy. A handbook that is long, poorly organized, or full of detail causes confusion and frustration for the employee who's trying to find information. They should be concise, making it easy for employees to locate needed information quickly. If they need an answer, they don't want to spend 30 minutes reading through a handbook trying to find the answer. They need to find it quickly. So in the current 2008 handbook also contains a lot of administrative policies. That's not something that's typically included in a handbook. The intended audience for an employee handbook is the employee. It's meant to inform employees of what they may expect for the employer and what is expected of them. It's not meant to be the how or the why behind the policies. It sets forth the essential terms and conditions that govern the employment relationship. So the administrative policies, on the flip side, are intended for use by the city administrator, by HR, and the department heads. They describe in detail how policies are implemented and enforced, and it serves as a reference tool to ensure management is consistent in the way it handles day-to-day employee matters. So that's the big difference between a handbook and the administrative policies. So the process I used to update the employee handbook, because it was so old, I felt the best way to approach it is just to start from scratch. So the way I did it was I gathered sample handbooks that Catherine had provided from other municipalities. I used sample employee handbooks from Employers Council and also from SHRM, which is Society for Human Resource Management. So then I also used, this is not my first rodeo, I was in legal for 15 years, and then I've been in HR for 18. So I've got a lot of experience and a lot of years of doing HR, and not my first employee handbook, so it wasn't anything new. It's something I've done multiple times before. So I drew on that experience as well to help create this new handbook. So I drafted, I shared it with the city administrator, and because it was important for the department heads to be a part of it as well, I also shared it with them. And so they reviewed it for a period of a few weeks. We discussed it. They gave me their feedback on things that may not work well for them or conflicts with the way they were currently doing things. We went back and revised it again. I provided it to Catherine. Catherine and I worked on it quite a bit. Several versions went back and forth. She was a very valuable resource as I was learning the new public law. I've had a lot of experience in private, but not a lot in public, so it was a little bit different. I learned a lot. So then COVID hit. And as a result of COVID, there were many new laws that emerged. So we had the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, we had the Colorado Sick Leave Law that passed, we had the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. All of those things passed as we were nearing the end of our handbook revision. So we had to go back and revise some more, add some more policies, get it updated again, and that's part of the reason why it took a little bit longer than what we had hoped. So then we did a final review of the handbook. Catherine and I just finished it in the last week or so, and that's what the version that you guys have in front of you tonight. So the 2021 handbook, it's divided into 8 sections. The first section is employment at will. The second is conflicts of interest and confidential information. 3 is equal opportunity and unlawful harassment. 4 is workplace safety. 5 is the employment relationship, which is that overview of the city guidelines. 6 are the workplace guidelines that outline the city's expectations and what happens if an employee is not meeting that expectation. 7 is paid time off and leaves of absence. And then 8 is that ever important pay and benefits section. And that is what makes up the proposed employee handbook. Any questions?
So do we have any questions or comments from council? Yes, Jim?
do, but I'm trying to find all my notes, or some of my notes.
Oh, keep looking. I'll ask a couple questions while you're
Go
doing that. Does Canyon City have a safety officer
We have a safety committee that
committee?
meets once a month. Mhm. It's comprised of different department heads, supervisors. We have a representative from each department on that safety committee.
You know, all of my experience has been really in the industrial environment, and they were pretty schizophrenic when it came to safety. I mean, their rules were, you know, it was not a reportable injury as long as the guy could sit at an office desk chair and not bleed on the floor too much, you know? But I noticed that in our handbook, there's, and of course, in industrial setting, because of the possibility of workman's compensation, it really changes things, especially when an employee could be off long-term for an injury, perhaps that occurred at home rather than on the job. And I noticed that there's no mention of discipline for not reporting safety-related events. Is that on purpose or usual, or?
So in the policy, we do outline that they should report it within a certain time frame. If they violate that policy, then there would be disciplinary action. But and ultimately, the work comp carrier, if we don't timely report it, they could deny that claim.
Correct.
Luckily, we have not run into that situation. Supervisors have been really, really good about making sure that I get that report within a very short, sometime within a matter of hours of that accident occurring. So luckily, we have not had that situation.
So should there be a general statement somewhere up front about discipline, failure to follow these, that perhaps a blanket statement or something like that? Or does something exist? Did I miss that?
I think it's
I thought that
addressed
there
in
was
here
something
somewhere, but let me see if I can find it.
Well, I see there, just above workplace safety, it says, where they're talking about harassment, it talks about discipline. And so my question is, you know, more of a blanket one or a global one. Shouldn't there be some kind of statement like that globally that informs employees that failure to follow the dictates of the employee handbook could result in disciplinary action? I mean, one way to think about it is the contrast between harassing behavior where discipline is mentioned versus not having some other statements, either scattered throughout the handbook or a global statement up front, indicates that there possibly no discipline action would be taken for violation. If you call it out and say, this will get discipline, but are silent on the other sections, then there can be an implication there that there's no discipline that would be used in those other sections.
Yep, we can definitely add a statement in there that just outlines that employees are expected to adhere to the policies, and if they don't, there could be consequences. We can add that in.
Okay, it's a little bit of a two-edged sword because, you know, talking to employees about discipline can be a lot of times counterproductive. You know, it has to be in the correct, you know, content set and setting, I guess you would say, to be effective. Yes, Frank.
Mine's a two-pronged question. Section 4, page 7. Quite a while back, when I was first on council, I realized that all the police officers had cell phones. Do they still have them? Okay, now, my question comes with this, and I'm looking at the part with regards to the cell phones. I understand when the reason for them getting the cell phone was because a lot of people have scanners and this and that, and so it allows them an opportunity to address somebody else without the public being able to listen in on it. I don't see anything in here that gives them an exception to the fact that, because I see them driving and I see them talking, okay? And if they're allowed to have them and we want to protect them and their safety, I think we need to add something in this page, that part of it, that takes care of that problem. Because once people realize we got this handbook out and they're looking at stuff and they see stuff like that, which, you know, they have the right to look at all this stuff in here. And then the question's going to come, well, we see a police officer, he's driving down the road and he's on his cell phone. So for protection of the police officer and the citizens, I think we need to add something in there with an exception for them with regards to it being conducting business, their routine business as far as a law enforcement officer goes.
Yep. So each department, the police department especially, has their own set of department policies. So that would be addressed in that department policy, but we can certainly make a note of it in the general handbook. That way all employees
And I think
are
it
aware
needs
of
to be
that.
here too, okay? Because the public doesn't have complete access to their policies from the police department.
Right.
But they do have access to stuff like
this
this,
one.
so I think, you know, it should be just something we need to add to it, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Jim?
I'm on page 7 also, and I'm looking at the third paragraph under 408, where it talks about texting. Well, it mentions driving. And I'm sure this is an attorney question.
I
But
think
the-
I know what's coming.
Huh?
I think I know what your question is, but I'll let you ask.
Well, it says texting, but at least in my mind, that says texting, and then it closes with while driving. I'm not an English major either, but does that mean that the passenger can text or the passenger cannot text?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. So I think maybe this is what I said. I'm assuming that the prohibition is for the driver only and while they're driving. So texting while driving is prohibited in all city vehicles, motor vehicles, and personal vehicles
Okay.
while on city business. Is that
Yeah,
kind of addressed?
I think that clears it up.
Yeah, okay.
And then, what's the fundamental difference from a coordination and mental perspective as to whether I'm texting or whether I'm inputting information into my GPS device?
Most vehicles now won't allow you to enter in that information while the vehicle is moving. You actually have to stop before that feature of a GPS is enabled. So I don't know what our current,
But you specifically have eliminated that by saying that texting does not involve the input of a GPS system.
okay, we can reword that.
Well, I would imagine if there was a car accident, that the phone would be checked, and they would be able to see the time if they were texting while.
That's not the point. The point is that you can't text and drive, but it's saying that you can in fact input information into a GPS system and drive.
What's the
And
difference?
and I want to know what the fundamental difference is.
Yeah, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I think what Ivy's talking about is a car, like a car GPS system and not your phone GPS system. I don't know if that's where the.
What's the difference?
Well,
Whether
either
it's on
way,
Because the way this
They
is
should pull over
worded,
just like the texting, is that what you're
it's
saying?
worded as a vehicle global positioning system or vehicle navigation system. So it's the thing attached to your vehicle and not your phone. But we
Right.
can clarify it regardless.
Right, but my question still is, what's the difference between me, which my wife will disagree with you, what's the difference between me texting and me looking at the dash and inputting information into my GPS system while I'm driving?
Because as Ivy says, most GPS systems won't let you do that.
Yeah, you will.
Well, why not just
You can
say,
input an address.
pull over to enter in your GPS? Either way, it's same as consistent.
Yep.
But we can clarify it. But to your point of what's the difference, I mean, well, I mean, there's laws about texting and driving, right? And
Right.
those laws, I don't think cover putting an address in your vehicle's GPS system. So that's one difference.
Just telling you, I don't know that there's a fundamental difference in terms of a distraction.
I understand. And I guess we can talk about whether we want to eliminate that exception to make it more consistent.
I don't know of a city vehicle that has a GPS system, so I'm fine removing that language.
Well, but it technically could apply to a police officer,
Correct.
because they are not supposed to be operating their whatchamacallits during operation, and they could be. And then that could, in fact, in some form or fashion, get claimed to be part of that, which,
Well, hopefully clarifying that this section 408 is not, does not apply to the police department. Sworn officers might take care of that. You know, other employees of the police department, we don't necessarily want a blanket exemption for them, but for the sworn officers on duty, performing their duties, they need some latitude for both cell phone use and mobile data terminal use.
do we, how do we classify the sworn guys? Is that what they are classified as, sworn
They are.
Post-certified.
or post-certified as a category?
We classify them as sworn and non-sworn.
And then on page 8, where we talk about temporary, it just seems odd that we would have, there appears to be no limitation on the time frame of temporary, or am I not catching something?
Temporary is typically 6 months or less.
Why wouldn't you say that then?
We can definitely add that. It limits us if we need to go to 7 months for like our seasonals for Parks Department. If we say temporary is 6 months, then we have to stick to that 6 months. And that may not always be practical for,
But you have a
Parks.
seasonal category that would address the seasonal guys. I just find it odd that we have temporary, and I'm looking at it from an abusive employee situation, that it never says how long that is.
Catherine, are there any ACA implications with specifying a time frame there on that temporary?
It's really based upon what the hours are, and, I mean, it starts from that initial full-time, part-time classification, and then you do that kind of aggregate of the hours of the temporary, so it's really what's happening on the ground and not so much how you're classifying people.
Okay.
So, you know, if you classify them as seasonal or you classify them as temporary, from the ACA perspective, doesn't matter, it just matters how many hours
The
those
30
people are
hours
working.
average.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and whether they're designated and hired as full-time or designated and hired as part-time.
Right,
I-
Yeah,
I
because you
don't-
do the look back, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have a problem. I just think if we're going to have a temporary employee category, there should be a time frame
Okay.
so that everybody that's my feeling, so that everybody understands what that is.
Okay.
When you
So-
consider some of the abuses that go on in the temporary category with employees of hiring and then reaching your term and then getting rehired and you're a temporary employee for the next 6 years.
So we can add for a limited duration of 6 months or less.
I'm open,
Yeah.
but just something. I don't.
Yeah, I think
The only thing-
we can talk about the time frame, but yeah, we can put something in there.
Yeah, the only thing, I mean, and I agree with that, but the only thing you gotta worry about is there might be a circumstance, it's a temporary employee that we say, hey, we got 3 more weeks to finish this project or whatever, so, you know, then that becomes that issue with that, so, you know, we gotta make sure that we account for that as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a temporary situation that I don't know that we've dealt with one since I've been administrator.
Could add interns, I don't know if that counts.
Do what?
Internships?
Is it still me, or is somebody else going to ask a question?
Sure.
Account page 10, this is maybe a philosophical, stupid question, but Under 506, it really never mentions, does it, that they're actually getting compensated? Or are they?
Oh, when they're attending training, they're definitely on the clock, so they would be
Well, but that's not
compensated.
always the case. I mean, legally, it may be the situation, but that's not always the case with employers.
It's definitely legally the situation.
Right.
Well, but this is, the heading is professional development,
Right.
and so it's, as opposed to training, right? So it's. so
Well, it
it's-
says training.
I know, it's training in the context of professional development, indicating that the person is a full-time employee.
It didn't indicate in anything. You could be a temporary employee and go get professional development.
I suppose you could, but I mean, the department head's gonna decide whether or not you get to go do that. If you wanna do that on your free time and the city hasn't approved it, then yeah, you're not gonna be compensated. So there's prior approval required, so the department head's gonna make that call. Well, you're a temporary employee, you're only here for 7 months, we're not gonna send you off to the $3,000 course for whatever. And maybe you would, I don't know, but, I mean, we can put a simple statement in there, I mean, provided Ivy and Ryan are okay, I'm just suggesting something that says, employees will be compensated pursuant to the law while at training or something like that.
Well, now what goes along with that is, what do you do about travel to and from training?
So the law is really, really complicated about
Right.
travel to training, and way too complicated to put in here, because it's extremely complicated. So we'd either address that in an administrative policy in greater detail, or probably through an administrative
Yep.
policy is my guess, in greater detail, because it is very complicated, the travel part of things. So.
Okay,
And overnights and things like that can become complicated.
Frank, did you have something? Is that you? Oh, this is Frank.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but a lot of our employees deal with the public on a very regular basis. And we do have parts in here about harassment and anti-bullying policy that refer to their behavior internally within City Hall. Would it be appropriate to also have language about how they treat or act towards members of the public or our customers?
And that's addressed
I
in
thought there was a
the,
section.
that's addressed in the actual training. It explains to the employees that harassment is not just internal, it's also customers, it could be vendors. So that's explained in more in detail in the training. But we may be able to clarify that language in our policy just to make sure that it's reinforced and restated in the handbook so that employees understand that it's not just internal.
Really aware that that's really important to us to have that good face for our public. And then it also has a section about if an employee has a complaint about someone internally. Just out of curiosity, what happens if there's a member of the public that has a complaint about an employee? Is there a process for that?
Why would that happen?
That would probably not reside in an employee handbook. That would be more like a, like
Administrative policy.
administrative policy.
Have to make sure that that's in there.
All right, thank you.
On page 8, or 13, I'm sorry, and this just stuck out at me for some reason, but I think on step 3 on the bottom, where it says step 1, that's really not a 1, I think that's an I.
Okay.
I have no idea why that captured my attention, but it did. And then, on page 18, I assume this comes out of current policy. Under 612, the last paragraph in 612 where it talks about when your application has been accepted, is that from current policy?
Ryan and I talked about that quite a bit, and that's what's in the 2008 handbook, and I questioned him whether or not that was still accurate and current, and Ryan, it was
Yeah,
the process, correct? Yeah.
I believe so.
Well, why is it not after the election? Because you have specific verbiage in here that talks about political and all of those things, meaning that I could not campaign essentially on city grounds or while I'm at work. You specifically have covered that issue, but now you're coming back and saying that if I want to be on city council, I have to resign before I'm ever elected. And I don't think that seems fair.
Ryan, do you know if there was a reason why that?
No, I believe that was just the current policy and
I-
carried it forward, but.
I believe, there's something jiggling my memory here that says that that's actually part of the charter. I think there's some charter language that says no city employee may,
Be a council member.
Well, I know it goes the other way. There's a wait time between being a
Right.
council member and being a city employee, but I can't.
6 months or something like that, or
1 year.
1 year?
It's 1 year, I believe.
Right, and there's
But-
some verbiage in there that mentions the other. But if I recall right, that verbiage talks about being both positions. And you can't be in both positions unless you're actually elected,
Okay,
is my point.
we'll take a look at that charter and see.
Pardon?
We'll take a look at the charter, and see if there's anything that specifically talks
Okay.
about, once it's accepted.
I mean, I think it should be after an employee's elected. Because then you have a true you have a true conflict and you're in violation of the charter. Frank, do you know what that charter exactly reads on getting into council? You have to be elected to council and then you can't be an employee, right? Is the way it was kind of read? Yeah. I think that's the intention of it, is that after I'm elected, I can no longer be a city employee versus,
You have to wait 2 years.
well, yeah, but you're talking about the other way.
Okay. No, but you have the other way. Yeah, you can do that.
yes.
Page 19, when we talk about PTO. So I'm assuming under this policy that while my supervisor has discretion, that if I need to take off next Friday, I can't use my PTO. Correct?
No.
How are you getting around that paragraph?
Which paragraph in particular are you?
I'm looking at page 19, paragraph, I don't know, where it says employees may begin using PTO as it is accrued.
Right, so
Employees should provide at least 2 weeks' notice for vacation requests of 40 hours or less.
that should read 40 hours or more, I believe.
Well, there's another one down there, it says 30 days' notice for 40 hours or more, which is still kind of ludicrous, but
Yep. That was something that came out of the 2008 handbook, and we discussed it with department heads. Some of the department heads felt like they wanted to have adequate notice for coverage.
right, I understand that. But
But
he's not going to go out and hire somebody,
Right, right.
or at least I would hope Ryan doesn't allow him to. Or will you? My fundamental point here is, from my personal belief, PTO is time that I've earned as an employee, and I need to respect the city's needs to take that. But don't make it a hassle for me to take my time off.
Right, right.
Because if you're going to do
absolutely.
that, you know what's going to happen?
Yeah,
I'm going to call off.
yep.
So we need to make it as reasonable as possible, and I personally don't think 40 hours or 1 week's notice for using a day
One
off
day.
is reasonable. That's my opinion. Because you don't have sick time now, right?
Yeah, it's
Correct.
all
It's all
PTO.
PTO.
So if I got a doctor's appointment next week, I'm basically going to call off. So there goes your whole scheduling system, because you're not gonna give me the time off. I gotta go to the doctor, so I'll call you in Friday morning, 2 hours before my shift, to tell you I'm not gonna make it in. That's what's gonna happen.
Yep.
I've got,
Huh? Jump in there, buddy.
no, the other one that I had was just in case if there's no notification on 3 days of, on an absence, I think there definitely needs to make sure that,
That-
there could be some circumstances that the person cannot get to or unable to, or, there has to be something in there labeled, and I know that you would be very fair with this, but there has to be something in there, because it doesn't say anything, because it says you need 3 days, or if you don't notify, but, there could be a circumstance that they could not notify it within 3 days. That's very, very true, I think.
So you're talking the
You're
3-day
thinking-
no call, no show?
No-show.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking on the, due to work illness or emergency.
That's a no call, no show.
Yeah, no call, no show, but there's gotta be some, I don't think, but there's gotta be a little bit of.
Yeah, certainly if an employee is not
Absolutely.
showing up, we're
You're checking in to see why.
we're checking in with an emergency contact to see what's going on,
Right.
because
But even
Okay.
if,
We wanna
even
make
if
sure-
by chance the
yep.
emergency contact doesn't know,
Yeah.
there still has to be that, so, I know.
All
Okay.
right, so from that standpoint, you've answered my question, that if an employee doesn't show up today, no show, no call, you're gonna take some kind of action,
yeah, well, the first day,
not action against the employee,
right,
but,
yeah.
but to verify that we don't have something going on that we're gonna
Yep.
regret.
Yeah, we want to make sure that, the health and safety of our employees are
okay.
paramount.
Just like the kids who
Yeah.
skip school.
Huh?
Just like the kids who skip school. Check on them.
They don't get 3 days, Frank.
And we never did that.
Yeah. During our time, we didn't do that, Frank. All right, I got something else here, but I gotta find it. Am I up? Page 26. And I don't know, I guess this goes into an administrative policy, but the second statement, where it talks about an employee with unused accrued compensatory time at the time of separation shall be paid. Where's that rate established?
The rate as far as the payout rate,
Right,
it's their current hourly rate.
Yeah.
well, I know, but how many hours do you pay them?
So when they earn comp time, it's in lieu of overtime, so it's time and a half.
Right. So now if I'm gonna get paid for it,
It has a monetary value and not an hour value. So if you have comp time, it's been converted, right? So it's your rate. So let's say you make $10 an hour. So you get, I guess I'd put it like 1 hour of comp time, or that unit is worth $15 because it's time and a half. So if you were to leave and you still had comp time to use, you would be paid that $15. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
well, you caused another question. Could be.
URA starts at 6. You're a little early.
That's
That-
not,
That
that's not
clock's not right.
This is employee handbook stuff, Lance, so. That's all right, you can stay here if you
Yeah, you
want.
can stay, it's fine.
It's a public meeting. So say that again. When I have yours payroll system is not keeping track of comp time in hours?
It does.
It does in hours.
Well,
So let's just
I
say
think it converts
that,
it
that the.
I think it converts it
Yeah.
to a dollar
to a
amount.
dollar amount.
So then what if I want to use it?
you use the amount of time that that dollar amount is worth.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Okay.
gotta be kidding me.
No, I know, it's super messy. So like, again, in my example, like, and Ivy can correct, because I'm not on that side of the system, so I might say something wrong. But if you have $15 worth of comp time, because you have that value, you got that comp time. If you want to use it, you get an hour and a half, because your rate of pay is $10 an hour, and that's the equivalent, an hour and a half is the equivalent of $15, which is what you were given when you transferred your overtime to comp
Do
time.
comp time, correct.
When-
It's like a delay in the, I'm gonna regret this statement, but it's a delay in the overtime wage payment so that you can take time off of work instead of getting your overtime. But the value should be equal. Like the dollar value for the time should be equal to the amount of time you're gonna take off. Does that help?
So if I work an hour of comp time, I'm gonna get 1 hour of my wage, 1.5 hours of my wage time, correct? I mean, that's the quirk,
Yeah, but
is you gotta
don't-
be careful.
You don't work comp time.
Right.
You work and you get overtime and you can convert your
Right.
overtime to comp time. So you don't work comp time.
Right.
Comp time's actually time off.
Right.
Right.
So I have an hour of comp time because I've worked my 40 hours as a regular employee.
You have an hour of overtime,
I have
not
an hour
comp
of
time.
overtime.
Yes,
That's gonna get converted to comp time.
correct.
Do you know the formula that they're currently using to create that dollar amount?
It's the hourly wage of the individual. Overtime is based upon the individual's regular rate of pay. Period. It just is. That's how the law works.
So so if you work an hour of overtime and you receive compensation time, compensatory time,
Yeah.
yet the rate, the formula is 1.5 times your straight
That's not
hour
what she
rate.
said.
No, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe I'm not doing as good a job of it as John, but yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Because you said regular rate.
Right. Your overtime rate its core value comes from the regular rate of pay, which is that $10 example, right? So when you work an hour of overtime, you have a $15 value, okay? So you either take $15 in overtime, or it gets converted to comp time, and it has a value of $15. So it's either paid to you later as $15, or you use it as time off, and you get an hour and a half off, because it's $15. And that's what based
With
on,
a calculator.
yeah, yeah.
My only point is, I guess I'd have to see a check, because there's a quirk in there about when you convert the time, and the confusion factor for an employee. But it sounds like you got a handle on it.
You mean like if the employee's rate of pay changes over time, like how does
No,
the-
if you get if you work an hour over, and then you take that hour and convert it into comp time hours, that's an hour and a half.
Yep,
Right.
And you have to be very careful how you pay that hour and a half, because you don't pay that hour and a half at overtime. Because it's already overtime.
correct,
Correct.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
And a lot of people don't understand that, particularly when you go back and move it backwards. And if you have hours in the system that you're gonna pay, particularly at termination, you have to be careful at what rate you're gonna pay those hours, because if they're comp time hours at time and a half, they gotta be paid at regular time and not overtime. And a lot of employees don't understand that.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And the system accrues it as comp time and does that calculation.
Okay.
He doesn't trust the system.
And Ivy's door
Computer
is
does it.
always open if there's confusion.
Yeah,
Ivy's
well,
door
and
is
from my
always
experience, the employees here at least are very, 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 very familiar with that calculation. They can tell you to the minute or to the penny
Right, okay.
what that conversion is. So they're used to it, and they prefer to convert it to comp time versus that overtime payout, because they like their time off. They need that time off, so they are very familiar with that
Okay.
calculation.
All right,
Any other comments?
I think I'm done.
Are you
Really?
sure?
Are you sure? Don't encourage him, Ryan.
I've got one more, just, it's on 810, administrative pay corrections. And the only thing, on page 27, the only thing I'm wondering is just talking about, you know, underpayments and overpayments. And it says, you know, underpayments will be corrected in the next regular paycheck. But, you know, I hope there can be some leniency there, because sometimes people are going from paycheck to paycheck. And
Absolutely.
so I just want to make, you know, if
Yeah.
it's a significant amount or something, you know, I just want to make sure that something's there that we're not saying, hey, you're stuck for till the next check comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the new Paylocity system, it makes it a lot easier for us to cut a special check
Okay.
that gets direct deposited within, you know, less than a day. So we definitely look at that as well, because correct, some of our employees do live paycheck to paycheck, and we
Right.
don't ever
And-
want to put them in a bind. So
Right.
if it's a significant enough difference, we will go ahead and pay it out. And we normally will ask them, do you want that included in your next check, or would you like us to do it now?
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Mike,
Yes, Brent?
I have a quick question. What were the major changes from the 2008 employee handbook to the 2021 handbook?
The biggest changes were in compliance and legal
Okay.
updates, changes in law.
Just based on legislation? So just so that we're in compliant with current legislation?
Correct.
So really, we're not asking anything more from our employees other than to abide by the new legislation in place?
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct, yeah. And I am all about making it easier for the employee and the employer. My goal in HR has always been to find win-win situations for the employer and the employer. So it's all about making things easier and less restrictive for employees.
And one of City Council's strategic priorities in the balanced scorecard is customer service, and we're not looking at that as just customer service to the outside, you know, to the citizens of Canyon City. We're doing that, but we're also looking at it from the perspective of providing good customer service to our employees as well.
Okay, Ashley?
I just wanted to extend my gratitude and thanks to both Catherine and Ivy and our superintendents for the hard work that you did from taking this from scratch into doing something that is easy to reference and navigate, and that I think it'll really serve our city well. Thank you.
Thank you, my
Good job.
pleasure.
So where's it go from here?
So from here, we'll make the adjustments that we discussed tonight, and it will come back to City Council as a resolution. I don't know that we'll get it on the agenda for November 16th, but definitely by December 2nd.
Great. Any other comments from council? Then this meeting's adjourned.